Donna and I are privileged and honored to join you again. This is our second session with March of Dimes Canada, which we truly appreciate the opportunity to speak directly to caregivers, wherever you are in the trajectory of care. Donna and I hope that for the next hour and a half, we find opportunity to step into talking about care in ways that make sense to all of you. Despite the differences in ranges of our care experiences from beginning of life to chronic caregiving to end of life caregiving experiences, what we're going to talk about today is drawn from our book, The Unexpected Journey of Caring, the transformation from loved one to caregiver. And what Donna and I craft in this book and spent last week talking about, and we'll spend this afternoon talking, is the idea that despite these differences in our care experiences, there are commonalities that we can lean on, learn from, and gain from one another. And we're going to begin that venture today. Just a signal to you, as Tammy mentioned, Donna will be engaged throughout the dialogue in an informal style with me. This is an opportunity in particular for this workshop to get out a pencil or a piece of paper. We're going to go through some exercises today. So we ask you to bring your care experiences to the table here to think about what we're talking about and begin reflecting and engaging in this idea of caregiver relationship confusion, something that no matter where we are in the care experience, we all experience this transformation. And it is a transformation, Donna, from loved one to caregiver that we talk about in the book, and so many of the caregivers we speak to highlight as full of paradoxes that can create ongoing relationship challenges and opportunities with your loved one. Donna, do you want to say hi to everyone and maybe use your own experiences in this transformation to loved one to caregiver to introduce yourself?
Sure. It's so interesting. I think you've captured the ambivalence and the extreme opposites, that we experience in caregiving. You captured that very well here, Zachary. And I think, when I think about being many things at the same time, I think of, being so tired and being so frustrated at the feeling, at the ongoing grieving of incremental losses of function in somebody that I love. And, the tipping points into tears often are so minuscule, like burning your finger on the iron, which normally you just go, and probably say something like a bad word or something, and then it's done, right? It's not a cause for sobbing uncontrollably, but in caring, it often is. We tip into despair, and that's because of exhaustion. But 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, we can be laughing so hard at a dark humor joke, or we can offer something that we didn't even realize, like it's one of those moments. I'm sure people listening will recognize this when I say it. When we go through the day and we're looking after somebody we love, so often, you've got your head down. You're just getting it done. And it's very task oriented because there's so many things that you need to do. But, I am thinking of my son, Nicholas, or my mom, taking my hand unexpectedly and squeezing it in the case of Nicholas and pulling my arm to him to give me a hug. He has cerebral palsy, so it'd be an awkward movement, but I know this movement. It's Mom, give me a hug. And my mother saying, you will always be my baby. Come here. You're working too hard. And it is the joy of suddenly putting the task aside and saying, I want to celebrate the love in this moment.
So powerful, because you really highlight the idea that all of us here are gathered together because of this transformation from loved one to caregiver. It doesn't deny that there are incredible professionals who are doing incredible work in the care field in the public setting. But there's something very different, Donna, as you're highlighting, something very different that all of us here feel and experience in the private language of the home, in the informal relationship of our experience with our loved one. And as we'll talk about in a few minutes, everything, when I often say when care meets love, everything changes because we aren't prepared and we don't think about the kinds of relationships we engage in and how it creates complications and opportunities. And so I do ask all of us to think about these things. And this is an opportunity for us to informally, chat as we go along, to use our examples and to really think about these relationships that are so often neglected because we don't think in these ways. We think about traditional types of what you and I call in the book, Donna, role scripts, right? So if we think about it, when we say scripts, we're talking about the idea that everyone has kind of a mental schema in their head that guides them. They're a set of habits and perceptions that guide us and tell us what to worry about, what to think about, what to pay attention to, what not to pay attention to. For example, in the context of a parental role script, protecting your family and being responsible for the well-being of your family members is kind of consistent with the parental script, right, Donna? I mean, it's not like, there's markers along the way. There are parent groups. There's this notion that to be a good parent means X, Y, and Z. We all may individually experience it differently, but we have a parental role script. Same thing for a child, perhaps, in terms of what it means to be a good child or a loyal child or a child and how he or she is given freedom in the context of a family to experiment, to learn, to become themselves. So these are scripts, right? I mean, we're kind of born into these scripts in so many ways. It's not like we choose them as much as they shape us and they determine how we come to know ourselves and how we evaluate what we're doing or what we're not doing. And, maybe all of us are also, maybe some of us today are spouses and partners. So there's a spousal partner script, is there not? And we actually have rituals, right, Donna, about, preparing ourselves for this role, thinking about what it means to be exclusively in love and committed to one individual and what that means in terms of disclosure expectations, what you share, what you do on the weekends, what you don't do. So these kinds of guide us in so many ways, even though you may disagree with some of the parameters of the cultural scripts, they do guide us because we can say yes to them or we can reject them. If you're a sibling out there this afternoon, there are certain scripts about how frequently you might call, what's expected of you, what you share with your family, what you tell the outside world. And even as employees, we find very clear scripts, and oftentimes these are codified differently than the scripts that we talk about here in terms of relationships, but these are roles that we inhabit throughout the life cycle. So the question becomes, what is the caregiver script? Because I don't know, Donna, growing up, did you know what the caregiver script prior to your care experiences?
No, I certainly, I became a caregiver at 17 when my father had his first stroke. And I didn't know, of course, what that meant. I did know that my father was suddenly not my father. He was, I didn't know how to talk to him. I didn't know what to expect, because what you're talking about, Zachary, all of these scripts are so much wrapped in expectations that we have of each other. I mean, I expected my father to look after me always, to be my protector. And so I didn't know what it meant that he was suddenly very vulnerable and that he needed me and my mom to look after him. So you talked last week so eloquently, Zachary, about relational confusion. And I think that when we don't have a script, we suddenly find ourselves without one. We think, oh my gosh, how do I begin, like in my case, to talk to my dad or in the case of our son, I remember one time, you know, when you have a new baby, and he was my first child, so I really didn't know how to be a mom. And I was learning, as we do with babies, what he needed from me, and he was teaching me. But at the same time, his development wasn't normal per se, and he was having a lot of health challenges. So I was doing the best that I could to be a good mom. And that meant for me being an A++ star person who would do his therapy with him. And the more I could do therapy, the better. So I began to think maybe my caregiver script was to help him, you know, move his arm this way or leg that way. And one day, I remember we were up here at the cottage, and where I am right now, and he was down on the balcony with me, and I was doing his exercises on a blanket on the floor with him. And suddenly, I realized I looked up and I looked at his face, and I thought, I haven't been looking at his face for a long time. I've only been focused on what his arms and legs are doing, and making that the most important thing, because that's maybe what it meant to be a good mother. And that I changed my script that day. I said, I'm going to be a mom.
That's it in its entirety. That's what we're talking about today as we're listening here and participating. The idea that when you're with your dad, when your daughter role met, you know, your caregiver role, transformation happened. And likewise with your son, the mother role meets the caregiver role. It's not like one is forgotten. It's just what happens in between, because not only are we talking about roles, we're talking about relationships. And so all caregiver experiences are contextualized and complicated by this idea that there are relationship and role characteristics that shape so much of what we think we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing, and how we make sense of our experiences. So this is almost never talked about. I mean, this is what's so fascinating, is that we have very clear notions of what, as you mentioned, being a good mother might appear, what it might look like. We have very little understanding of what a caregiver is, because it's always emerging from a pre-existing relationship.